Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the Tuesday, April 2nd slate of college basketball DFS on DraftKings and FanDuel. We've got the NIT Semifinals taking place this Tuesday, and while it might not have the luster or the shine or the storylines as the actual Final Four, which is going to be tremendous, I do think that this is a very interesting DFS slate. It's a slate where we can make some money by playing on DraftKings and FanDuel. So we're going to break down both games for you here on this slate. We're going to tell you what you can expect from each game, as well as how you should build your DFS lineups, how you can kind of attack each games, and the players that need to be in those DFS lineups at the top of the board and as value plays as well. Now, college basketball season is unfortunately coming to a close. We only have 3 shows left this season, including this one. We're going to have the NIT semifinal slate, the Final Four slate, which I can't say for certain when I'm going to be able to record and get that one out, because DraftKings, I don't know when they're going to put out the pricing. Like, we know who's in the 2 games, so I don't know how long they're going to wait to put out the prices, but I will have a Final Four show, and then I will have a showdown slate show for the national championship game. So if you have been here with us for the entire college basketball season or not, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so that way you can be with us here for the rest of this week, for the rest of college basketball season. And then if you have been with us for college basketball, I strongly encourage you to try some other sports that we do here on the channel. We're still going to have the weekly golf previews, and then we're going to have some preseason/offseason NFL fantasy football content, as well as some college fantasy football content as well. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel so that way you can be with us here for all of that. Hopefully, for you guys, it's been a great college basketball season, because I know for me it has. I know it's had a little bit of ups and downs, but the ups have been fun, which makes the downs not hurt so bad, and you know that they're always going to come back up again. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into game number 1. But first, if you're not already, please hit the like button. It really does help me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it. And if you're listening on audio, please rate and review the podcast. It helps me so much, and you guys are the absolute best. If I've helped you any this college basketball season, please help me out just a little bit by hitting that like button and rate and review. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into game number 1, Utah taking on Indiana State. All right, so game number 1 is going to be between Indiana State and Utah, and I gotta say, this is looking like a pretty entertaining game, in my opinion. These 2 teams like to get up and down. These are very talented, very gifted offensive teams, and I'm looking forward to watching this one. KenPom has this as the highest projected scoring game of the slate. Well, it's a 2-game slate, so it is the higher projected scoring game of the slate. KenPom has it projected to be 84-83 in favor of Indiana State for 167-point total. That makes it the highest total of the night by 20 points, which means that, like the Georgia Seton Hall game, that total of 147 is not bad. Like on a main slate, that'd probably be like the 4th highest out of 12-ish from what we've seen most of the season. So it's not a bad total in that one, but this one is absolutely juicy. And like I said, these 2 teams like to get up and down. Utah ranks 58th in the nation in tempo, according to KenPom, and Indiana State ranks 38th. And in fact, if you look at their NIT games, even when teams have tried to slow them down, these 2 offenses have found ways to score the basketball. Indiana has scored 76 points in all 3 NIT games, and Utah has scored 74 points in all NIT games. And some of those were really paced down spots or against teams who were quite good defensively. And they still managed to get to 76 and 74. So guess what? I would be willing to pretty much bet money that this is going to reach at least 150 points. Now, on the Utah side, Utah's got some matchups in this game that I think they might be able to take advantage of. When you're looking for guys to play in DFS, though, they played an 8-man rotation so far in the NIT. It's been the starting 5 of Davon Smith, Gabe Madsen, Cole Bajema, Lawson Loveray, and Brandon Carlson, with coming off the bench Keba Keita, Hunter Erickson, and Ben Carlson. And so pretty much those are the only 8 guys that I'm going to consider here on this slate. And to me, the guy at the very top of the list has got to be the guy who is the highest priced player on the entire slate, Davon Smith, Mr. Triple-Double. Now, what's interesting is he's rumored to be entering the transfer portal, but he's supposedly going to play in these last 2 NIT games. So I don't know what to make of that. Nothing's really been officially announced, but there are some writers out there who do have him entering the portal. So, if we do get some news before tip that scrambles things, that would not be the biggest shock in the world. But I'm going to pretend as if he is playing in this game. And if he's playing, he's an absolute smash in DFS. Just bar none, he's an absolute smash play. Counting guys who played 20 or more minutes in each of the 3 games, He has led them in usage in all three NIT games, and that usage has turned into fantasy points in all three NIT games. He's put up 42, 56, and 62 fantasy points, and 2 of those have been triple doubles. So I believe he could actually tie the all-time NCAA record with another triple double here in this game. And with it being a pace-up spot against Indiana State, I got to feel like there's going to be pretty good chances for him to get there because more possessions is going to be increasing the amount of chances that he's going to have to put up rebounds and assists that he's going to need if he wants to put up a triple-double. In pace-up games, he's actually been particularly good. He scored 40 fantasy points or more in 4 of the last 5 games where the total reached 160 points. Well, this one's projected to get to 167, so you got to feel like it's going to get to 160, and so that just makes an absolute smash situation for Davon Smith, and I think you can just pretty much lock him into your lineup and figure out how to make the rest of it work from there. Side note, for the Final Four episode, we're going to have some hot takes. One of them is on a short slate, just lock in Zach Edey. More on that on the Final Four episode. A little bit of a teaser there. But on this one, I think that you can apply a similar strategy. Just lock in Davon Smith because he's got a higher ceiling and a higher floor than anyone else, and he's in a great pace-up situation. Now, from a fantasy perspective, their second best player in the NIT has been Gabe Madsen. He's put up 33, 42, and 29 fantasy points. He's really done it getting a lot of peripheral stats as well as scoring, taking double-digit shot attempts in each game. He's really played off of Davon Smith quite well. And because he would almost if that were to be the case. Now, the other 2 guards that play are going to be Cole Bajema and Hunter Erickson. They've kind of been splitting minutes. Bajema's just been okay. He's sitting at 5,300. He's only hit 4X once in the last 4 games. Hunter Erickson is sitting at 4,000, and he's hit 4X 3 times in the last 4 games. But you don't really know what you're going to get. You don't really know how many minutes they're going to play, but we do know that it's an absolutely incredible situation from a game environment perspective. So I do think that Bajema and Erickson are going to garner consideration from me, especially on a slate where there's not really a whole lot of value. And if you want to get value plays from this game, those are going to likely be 2 of the guys who you're going to have to use because there's not a lot of value to be had on the Indiana State side. Now, for the forward position for Utah, I could see their size giving Indiana State issues. Indiana State has not had to play a team with 2 legitimate 7-footers, and Utah does have 2 of them in Brandon Carlson and Lawson Lebrick. Carlson is more of a stretch big, more of a finesse big. He does a lot of his work from behind the arc. In fact, he doesn't even really rebound the ball a whole lot. In the NIT, he's had games of 11, 1, and 3 rebounds. So you don't really know what you're going to get from him from that perspective, but he is a stretch 7-footer, and I don't know how Indiana State is going to guard this, and he does have a legitimately high ceiling. He's had games this season of over 50 fantasy points, so it's going to be interesting. I think he's a really high ceiling play for GPPs. Brandon Carlson. Lawson Levering, I like in all formats. He's been really good in the NIT. The first game against UC Irvine, he did not play a whole lot, struggled with foul trouble, but the last 2 games, he's put up 25 and 21 fantasy points, and he's been very efficient in doing so, 4 for 6 from the field total. He's not a guy who takes a ton of shots, but he's a great rebounder, and he also will get you some assists on outlet passes. So in a game environment where it's going to be paced up, there's going to be a ton of possessions, and again, he's a 7-footer, and I don't know how Indiana State's going to deal with that. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for him to put up fantasy points, especially if they want to use him to post up on the low block and take advantage of the size down low that Indiana State does not have. Keba Kaita is the big that comes off the bench. He does have a legitimately high ceiling. Like, we've seen him have incredible performances this season, notably 46 against Oregon State. But I don't know, man. I think he's going to need foul trouble from either Carlson or Lovering to get there. And that's certainly not something that you can guarantee. I think he's a guy you can take shots at on GPPs, but he's certainly not any kind of a safe play. Now, on the Indiana State side, they play essentially a 6-man rotation. Their starting 5 is Conwell, Swope, Larry, Kent, and Avila, and then they play Xavier Bledson off the bench. Nobody else really plays notable minutes. Now, unfortunately for us in DFS, all 5 of their starters are above $6,000 on DraftKings. It makes it really hard to play multiple guys from that starting lineup, especially considering you're going to want to get to some of the Utah guys on the other side because of how good this game environment is. So who should you go with in this game? Well, I think all 5 of the starters make for pretty safe plays. All 5 of them played for 34 minutes or more against Cincinnati. All of them have had a really solid game here in the NIT. Now, the best one of those 5 is Larry Nerd himself, a.k.a. Steph Blurry, a.k.a. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Robbie Avila. He is great. He's really fun to watch. He tends to come in really highly owned because of the fact that he is literally a living legend. But also, he's been really good in the NIT, 35, 24, and 42 fantasy points. And he has been their usage leader throughout the entirety of the season. He gets a ton of peripheral stats, has been great in pace-up games. Just can't say enough about how good of a play he is as well. Ryan Conwell is just really good at basketball. He doesn't really have these great volume numbers. Like, he doesn't take 20-plus shots. He doesn't take like 9-plus three-pointers, but he gets a lot of peripheral stats, and he's really efficient from the field. He's a very solid, efficient player that makes the most of the opportunities that he's given. I think he's a little bit pricey at $8,500 because with his lack of volume, I think there's a very narrow pathway for Conwell, but I do think he's a very solid play, again, in a great game environment. Kent, Larry, and Swope all have their moments. Kent is kind of their small ball 4 who's going to be asked to do a lot here in this game. He's going to be asked to guard somebody much bigger than him. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But with Kent, Larry, and Swope, you're getting guys that play a crap ton of minutes. You're getting guys who have a big ceiling from a DFS perspective, and because they play all those minutes, they definitely have a solid floor as well. I would have liked to see Swope come in a little bit cheaper. I would have been really interested if he was like $5,500. Bledson is the guy that plays off the bench, and he has a pretty high usage rate when he's in there. So I'm definitely interested in getting to him at $3,800. He's a way that you can get to this game and definitely save a little bit of salary and make room for some of the other guys like we talked about that are great options at the top of the board here in this game. All right, so that go ahead and does it for game number 1. So let's take a quick breather, and then let's talk about semifinal number 2. Semifinal number 2, I do want to mention there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I tweet out all relevant updates for the show, as well as if you ever have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer via Twitter. So if you follow me on there, reach out to me on there. I'm more than happy to answer anything, as well as any show updates go on there. Also, I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. The link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Basically, the Fantasy Corner Discord is a community of a lot of really smart and really good people, really fun to talk to people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. We've got a lot of great minds in there, not just for college basketball, for MLB, NBA, NFL, college football, golf. We got it all covered in the Fantasy Corner Discord. And it's not only a great place where you can just bounce ideas off people and talk lineups and talk strategy, it's also a great place where you can just sweat it out and enjoy talking and watching the games together. And it's a great community to be a part of. I cannot recommend it enough if you're looking for more people to talk about DFS with. For me personally, my best DFS sports have always been college basketball and college football. And there have been people in this Discord who have helped me get better at NBA and MLB. And I cannot be more thankful enough for that. And apparently they say that I've helped them with college basketball and college football. So, it's a give and take, but it's a great community. And I cannot recommend it enough if you're looking for people to talk DFS with. All right. Last thing is I do write an article to my Patreon for every college basketball DFS slate where I profile my core plays as well as my lineup strategy and attack strategy for each slate. It is behind a paywall. And I understand college basketball season is coming to a close, but once college basketball is over, I will be doing the articles for golf every week, as well as preseason NFL content, best ball content, and then rolling right back into college football and college basketball season. So if you want those articles for the last few college basketball slates and then rolling it on over into the summer and fall, go ahead and head on over to patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. The money that I generate from that really does help finance a lot of the data that I buy from other sites that I'm using here on this show. So if you like what we do here, if you want to support what I do, then subscribing to the Patreon is one of the best ways you can do that. And it helps me out a ton financially. All right, so let's go ahead and move into semifinal number 2 between Seton Hall and Georgia. And like I said, this is the lower total of the night, but this isn't some Virginia Notre Dame rock fight. Like, this is a game that is still going to feature a lot of points being scored and a lot of players scoring a lot of fantasy points. So this game is projected to be 75-72 in favor of Seton Hall for a 147-point total. Georgia ranks 109th in the nation in tempo, whereas Seton Hall slows it down a bit. They rank 248th. They are still the two slowest teams on the slate, but Georgia's a bit of a pace-up spot for Seton Hall. So Seton Hall is going to see more possessions in this game than they generally do most nights in the Big East. And the two defenses that are being played are pretty solid. So even though there is a lot of possessions, these are two good, sound defensive teams. Georgia ranks 51st in the nation, whereas Seton Hall ranks 44th in the nation in defensive efficiency, according to Ken Pom. Now, injuries are the headliners in this game and will really dictate a lot of what you can do with your lineup. For Georgia, Jabri Abdur-Rahim, in my opinion, is unlikely to play. He has a foot injury, and why would you bring back a guy with a foot injury for an NIT semifinal when he hasn't played in a month? I can't envision a scenario in which he comes back and starts and plays 25 plus minutes. I just can't. So Jabri Abdur-Rahim, I don't think he plays, and even if he does play, I don't think it's at full capacity. Now, Russell Chewa, however you say it, he missed the second game of the NIT. Their round of 32 game, a round of 16 game, I forget, the NIT only has 32 teams. Their second round game against Wake Forest, he did not play. And then against Ohio State, he came back and played 5 minutes. I don't know what to make of that, because before that, he was this team's starting center, and he was quite good at it from a fantasy perspective. And in his salary of $5,100, he is objectively a misprice if he is back to his normal role. Is he back to that role, though? I don't know. I really don't, because Frank Anselm-Ebay has been great in the last 2 games. He played 27 minutes in the start against Wake Forest, put up 22 fantasy points. Played 27 minutes against Ohio State, even with Chua back in the lineup, and put up 27 fantasy points in those 27 minutes. So Anselm-Ebay has been the guy in the last 2 games. Like I said, I don't know if Chua is back to his normal role, but if he is, he's objectively a value at $5,100. If he is not, Anselm-Ebay is objectively a value at $3,900. Like, one of those two guys is going to go off. Even if they split minutes straight down the middle like 2020, I still think there's enough fancy points and opportunities to go around for those two guys to hit value. Now, the guy that throws a little bit of a wrench into that is the other guy who plays power forward and center for them, Jalen Deloach. He's played 15 minutes or more in all 3 NIT games. He is yet to turn into a massive fantasy performance. He's had 14, 8, and 13 fantasy points in those 3 games, but at a salary of $3,600, I'm certainly willing to buy into it, because, like, let me just go over a hypothetical here. So Anselm-Ebay was pretty much not a part of the rotation before Chua missed. And so what if Chua's back and plays close to a normal minutes load, but gets in foul trouble, and it's Deloach that comes in as opposed to Anselm-Ebay, because Deloach has always been a part of the rotation. So, like, I could just see a scenario where all 3 of these guys hit or miss here on this slate, and I really think that I'm going to be taking shots at all 3 of them in GPPs on DraftKings and FanDuel. Hopefully FanDuel has a slate. But I definitely think that from what I see so far, Anselm-Ebay would be the guy that I would be most likely to play because of what he has done and the fact that he did not get a price bump. Now, Dylan James has been starting at the 4 in place of Jabri Abdur-Rahim, and he's been pretty solid. Last 2 games, he's put up 22 and 14 fantasy points. He is not a very high usage player, but at only $4,800, he is going to have a little bit of a mismatch against Seton Hall, as Seton Hall likes to play 4 guards, maybe even 5 guards. So he is going to have a bit of a size and athleticism mismatch, and I could certainly see him taking advantage of it. And at $4,800, he doesn't need to do a whole lot to hit value. Now, if you thought the forward situation for Georgia was complicated, boy, do I have news for you. The guard situation is equally murky. So for Georgia, RJ Melendez was a guy that just randomly had these ceiling games throughout the course of the season, put up like just a lot of fancy points out of nowhere, had 53 against Florida and 36 against Bama in back-to-back games. And he hasn't done a whole lot since then. In the first round of the NIT, he had 30 fantasy points against Xavier, but in the last 2 games, he's had 4 and 9 on a total of 21 minutes played. So one could make the argument that he's been pretty much phased out of the rotation, but you could also make the argument that he's just a 30-point fantasy performance waiting to happen. And so at $4,600, he's a guy that I wouldn't mind taking shots on in GPPs, but just know that it's like you're either going to end up with like 3 or 30 fantasy points from Melendez. Now, in terms of more consistent guards, Noah Thomason has been their most consistent option in the NIT. He has been the guy who has taken the most shots throughout the NIT so far 14, 10, and 16 shots in those 3 games. 33 fantasy points against Ohio State has been his ceiling. I do not mind getting to him. Justin Hill is a guy who comes off the bench and takes a ton of shots. He's taken 11, 12, and 10 shots in those 3 NIT games. He is pretty darn scoring dependent, though. So his fantasy performances have only been 14, 30, and 18. So a little bit less consistency there from a fantasy perspective for Hill. And then Kane and Demery are the 2 freshmen for Georgia that they are really going to want to feature. Demery is just not like an alpha offensive player. But he is a guy who can put up a decent amount of peripheral stats. And so I could see a scenario where he does end up hitting value if he gives you like a 12, 6, and 6 stat line at $5,700. Blue Kane is a 3-and-D guy who was really good against Ohio State, put up 30 fantasy points in 30 minutes. And if he's going to continue playing 30-plus minutes, he's a guy that I like quite a bit. He was a really big-time recruit heading into Georgia, as was Demery. And so if these guys continue to play more minutes, continue to get more opportunities, they're guys that I think have a lot of upside as we end this season and look forward heading into next season. Now, on the Seton Hall side, they are really running out of bodies. They've got depth issues right now. So in their last game, Isaiah Coleman and Elijah Hutchins Everett both missed. And they were basically the only 2 guys who were playing off the bench before that game. Coleman missed with an illness. Hutchins Everett missed with an upper body injury. So if I was handicapping this one, I would say Coleman would be pretty likely to play this game. Hutchins Everett, I would say, is not likely to play in this game. And so what you saw off the bench in last game was Jaquan Sanders play a total of 15 minutes, put up 9 fantasy points. If Coleman is out again, I wouldn't mind going to him at 31,300. But then at the forward spot, they kind of rotated a lot of guys in order of minutes. Nana, Tubek, and Ozdegon all played. Nana would probably be the guy who would see the most minutes if Hutchins Everett continues to be out. He played 8 minutes and put up 7 fantasy points in that game against UNLV. Now, from there, those 2 guys being out, we just talked about what that did to the bench and how that opened up some of those deep options. If both of them are back, they're going to be the only bench guys who end up playing. But whether they're out or back, Seton Hall is a team that in this postseason is giving a ton of minutes to their starting 5. And that starting 5 is Kadari Richmond, Alamir Dawes, Dylan Adewusu, Dre Davis, and Jaden Bediako. Bediako has been a guy that we talked about all season long, how when he gets minutes, he tends to get there from a fantasy perspective. And now that, we've entered the postseason, and they've kind of ran out of bodies, like he's starting to get more and more minutes. And so 26 minutes against UNLV, 23 fantasy points in that game. Definitely a solid option at $5,200, especially if Georgia is without if Georgia is without Russell Chua or Jabri Abdur-Rahim, because we saw Felix Okpara have a really good game at the center spot for Ohio State last time out against Georgia. Now, from there, Dre Davis is a guy who's actually been playing like the stretch 5, like the small ball 5 role, and he's been great in the NIT. 38, 33, and 34 fantasy points. Would have no problem going back to him either. Really, the other 4 guys after Bediako in the starting lineup, Richmond, Dawes, Adewusu, and Davis, they've all been great in the NIT. They've all been putting up a ton of fantasy points, and they've all really had their usage lumped together and their fantasy points go up because they've all been having to play extended minutes. They've all been having to pick up the slack in terms of rebounding. They've all been having to take more shots because they're out on the floor more because they really are running out of bodies on the bench. Kadari Richmond is their best player. He is their usage leader over the course of the season. 3 NIT games, he's put up 30, 39, and 50 fantasy points, and he really hasn't done it with shooting the ball a whole lot, which is scary because, there have been a lot of games this season where he's taken north of 15 shots and putting up like 50-plus fantasy points. So Kadari Richmond, I think, does have a ton of upside. Like, really, this is a slate where the top 3 players in terms of price, Smith, Richmond, and Avila, are all great options. I can see an argument for all 3 of them. If you want to be different, I think Richmond will probably be lower owned compared to Smith and Avila, given that it is the worst game environment. But like I said, Davis, Dawes, and Adewusu have all been great in the NIT, particularly Alamir Dawes. He had 53 fantasy points against St. Joe's and then followed it up with 29 and 34 in the next 2 games. He has taken an average of 18 shots per game in this NIT. And if that is going to continue, he's a guy that's got to be in your lineups at $7,200 because that's objectively a mispriced. Guys who take that many shots don't generally get priced at that. And then even Adewusu has been pretty solid. He's been a really solid rebounder here in the NIT, playing a ton of minutes. 32, 20, and 25 fantasy points in those 3 NIT games. So really what you've got with this slate is, with there being so much good options at the top, you're really going to have to find some value options. And so what I expect to be the case is I expect a lot of people to start their lineup with one of the guys at the top, whether it be Davon Smith or Kadari Richmond. And then after that, going down to immediately get like a value punt type play. And I think that the most popular one of those will be Frank Anselm eBay of Georgia. And then people will just be kind of piecing their lineup together piece by piece after that. But if you're looking for value, I think you can go with one of the Utah guys. I think you can go with Xavier Bledson from Indiana State. I think you could try your luck at one of the Georgia bigs, or I think you could maybe try your luck with Jaquan Coleman, or I'm sorry, not Jaquan Coleman, Jaquan Sanders, or Nana for Seton Hall if you're looking for a punt play there. All right, so that does it for these 2 games, and that does it for this NIT semifinal slate here on Tuesday, April 2nd. Like I said, we are going to have our full episode for the Final Four coming up this week, so make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because I can't guarantee what day that's going to be, because I don't know when DraftKings is going to put pricing out. So if you're subscribed, you will know when it comes out one way or another. And you'll be able to watch it or listen to it as soon as it drops. Lastly, if you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like button. It helps me out a ton. Also, please subscribe to the channel if you've not already. Like I said, you'll know when our next episodes drop if you are subscribed to the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, I don't know what just happened with my camera, but I'm very thankful that it happened at the end of the video and not at the beginning. Anyway, that pretty much does it for this episode, guys. So we will see you guys later on here in the week. But before we go, hopefully we're able to give you guys plenty of good information to build some winning DFS lineups for this Tuesday slate. Best of luck to you on this Tuesday slate. Hope you guys are able to have a successful day. Come ready for the Final Four slate this weekend, because this is really just an appetizer for the main course that is the Final Four. And like I said, we're going to have a banger of an episode, because I've got some hot takes, because I've been watching a lot of college basketball. I have been looking at a lot of DFS lineups, a lot of information and box scores. So I've got some hot takes on some of these DFS stuff for this Final Four slate. But anyway, thank you guys for watching and listening to this point. Hopefully you guys have a great Tuesday slate, and I will see you guys next time.